Silver ripped through Jackson's chest, burning like white-hot needles. A wet, rattling gasp tore at his throat, choking him on the metallic taste of his own blood. Icy leather pressed against his bare, ruined skin as darkness crowded the edges of his vision. Fighting the poison took everything he had. Coastal syndicate alphas didn't die freezing in the snow. They ruled cities of glass and steel, surrounded by the hum of traffic and the sharp cut of tailored suits. A sudden jolt rattled his teeth. The car hit a rut, sending a fresh spike of agony through his side. A low groan clawed up his throat. "Stay still." The voice belonged to a woman, soft, yet laced with raw, biting fear. Petrichor and crushed pine needles suddenly punched through the stench of wet snow and copper. Beneath the earthiness, a sharp cut of wild honey hit his senses. His dying wolf violently surged. The beast clawed at his ribs, howling in the pitch black of his fading mind. Mine, forcing his eyelids open, sunlight seared his retinas. Through the blur, her hands gripped the steering wheel so hard, her knuckles turned stark white. A frantic pulse fluttered visibly at the base of her pale throat. Someone back home had sold him out to the assassins, leaving him to bleed out in the mountains. But none of the syndicate politics mattered right now. The entire world narrowed to the woman driving the car. Trying to demand her name, only a wet cough spilled over his lips. Blood splattered his chin. She flinched, her stormy gray eyes darting to the rearview mirror. For a split second, their reflections locked in the glass. The engine hum faded into background static. He saw profound, freezing sorrow hiding in that gaze. Why did his fated mate smell like a broken pack? She smelled like ice and walled-off corners. He wanted to shatter every single barrier she had built. Almost there. The steering wheel creaked under her grip. "Just don't die on me, please." She spoke to him like a dying stray, not a king. The sting to his pride barely registered against the sheer desperation keeping him anchored to consciousness. Eventually, the tires crunched to a halt. The engine clicked off, leaving only the biting wind howling against the metal doors. Cold air washed over him as the back door yanked open. Small, freezing hands grabbed his bruised shoulders. The touch delivered a visceral electric shock. Fire bloomed beneath his skin, snapping the mate bond into place, with a loud crack inside his skull. Groaning, he leaned into her grip. The taste of copper and the smell of snow mixed with the absolute certainty settling in his bones. He would survive this ambush. He would rip the throats out of the men who did this, and then he would claim the woman dragging him through the snow. Dragging a grown man out of a blizzard left a trail of red across the snow and right through the front door of a secluded cabin. Jackson woke to blinding, sterile white light and the sharp bite of industrial bleach. The chemical stink assaulted his nose, masking the honey scent his wolf craved. Searing pain radiated from his chest as he lay pinned flat against a hard, wooden kitchen table. The silver burned so deep in his veins that shifting remained impossible, trapping him in his vulnerable human form. Blinking the blur away, he found her standing directly over him. Latex gloves, stained bright red with his blood, encased her hands. She gripped a pair of metal surgical forceps. This wasn't a fragile stray. The stormy focus in her eyes belonged to a clinician. Fast, capable, unflinching. Hold still. It wasn't a request. Nobody commanded the Coastal Alpha. Ever. He gave orders from high-rise boardrooms and dealt in leverage. Yet, he stayed completely motionless. The forceps dug deep into his torn shoulder. A roar of pure agony ripped from his throat, forcing his muscles to coil tight. Fangs instinctively dropped past his lips, slick with saliva and blood. She froze. The metal tool slipped with a wet click against his collarbone. Staring at his mouth, the pulse at her throat jumped. Shifter. The word dropped from her lips, laced with shock. His golden eyes locked onto hers. Pushing his power into the cramped room, he expected the standard submission. He needed her to recognize her mate. Mine. The low, vibrating rumble rattled the wooden table beneath him. She didn't bow her head. She didn't offer her neck. Stepping back, The thud of her boots echoed in the sudden quiet. The scent of bitter terror spiked in the air, hitting him like a physical blow. Forcing a bruised arm upward, he reached toward her wrist. She violently jerked away before his fingers could even brush her sleeve. The rejection cracked like a whip in the sterile room. His wolf whined, distressed by the look in her eyes. She didn't see a king. She saw a monster. "Don't do that." Her chin tipped up, defiant despite the tremor in her voice. "I am trying to save your life. If you try to alpha command me again, I will let you bleed out." The fierce rebellion radiating from her small frame sent a jolt of desire straight to his core. She was his cure and his fated partner, yet she wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. Letting his arm drop back to the bloody wood, he swallowed the dry ache in his throat. "Your name." Gray eyes scanned his face, calculating the threat. "Harper." Turning away, she grabbed a bottle of clear antiseptic. "Now brace yourself. This is going to burn." Unscrewing the cap, she tipped the bottle, ready to pour literal fire into his open wounds. Surviving the makeshift surgery left Jackson confined to a narrow bed in a spare room, his stitched torso wrapped tight in white gauze. Antibiotics rushed through his system, fighting the lingering silver. Out in the hallway, Harper paced the wooden floorboards, back and forth. The floor creaked under her restless boots. The erratic rhythm of her heartbeat drifted through the cracked door. Beneath the bleach and pine, he caught the sour tang of old trauma. She was a runner, broken by a male in her past. A dark, lethal rage boiled in his gut, promising death to whoever had hurt her. Then, a low howl echoed through the mountain valley outside. His eyes snapped open. Gold flared brightly in the dim light. The assassins hadn't lost the trail. They had tracked his blood directly to her doorstep. Sitting up sent a fresh wave of agony through his stitched torso. Hot wetness trickled down his side, soaking into the bandages. Ignoring the sting, he swung his legs over the edge of the mattress. The pacing in the hallway stopped dead. Harper appeared in the doorway, her face entirely drained of color. She stared past him, fixated on the frosty window at the end of the hall. "Did you hear that?" The wind carried the rancid stench of wet fur, cheap metal, and malice. Half a dozen rogue wolves circled the cabin in the blizzard. "Come here." The gravelly demand scraped his dry throat. Shaking her head, she backed away on pure instinct. "No, no, 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 I can't do this. I left that world. I left it all behind." Ice cracked under the pressure of her rising panic. "Harper." Forcing his bare feet onto the cold floor, the room spun. He leaned his shoulder hard against the doorframe, waiting for the dizziness to pass. "Listen to me. You are safe. I will kill them." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You can barely stand." She told the truth. He was a king without his claws, bleeding onto a stranger's floor. The overhead lights flickered. Once, twice. Then, the cabin plunged into pitch-black darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died, leaving a suffocating quiet in its wake. Dust motes settled in the ambient gray light, bleeding through the frosted glass. A distinct crunch of boots compressed the snow just outside the walls. A soft whimper slipped from her lips. Reaching out blindly, his fingers wrapped around her wrist. This time, he didn't allow her to pull away. Yanking her forward, she collided flush against his hot, bare chest. She gasped, her hands flying up to push against his rigid muscles. "Do not run," he whispered into her hair, inhaling the wild honey. "Do exactly as I say." A rock crashed through the living room window, spraying sharp ice and glass across the floorboards. Dragging Harper behind his back, Jackson bared his bloody fangs into the dark as the cold wind poured inside. The freezing blizzard ripped through the shattered living room glass, carrying a barrage of jagged ice shards. Jackson shoved Harper behind his broad back, positioning his ruined body between her and the storm. A rancid stench of wet dog and cheap silver punched through the cold pine air. He pushed off the wooden floorboards, desperate to stand. Back in his coastal city, loyal enforcers handled violent threats in rain-slicked alleys long before trouble reached his penthouse. Here, stripped of his pack, he had to be the shield. His torn abdominal muscles tore further. His legs buckled. Collapsing hard onto the icy wood, he swallowed a mouthful of fresh, metallic blood. Before the ringing in his ears could fade, small, frantic hands clamped onto his thick arms. Harper didn't scream. Dropping low to the floor, she dragged his dead weight away from the broken window. Her fingers dug into the floorboards, scraping aside a braided rug to reveal a hidden metal latch. Boots stomped up the porch steps outside. Yanking the thick trapdoor open, a pitch-black, musty storm cellar yawned below them. She shoved him down the steep, narrow wooden stairs. Tumbling into the freezing dirt, he bit his tongue to trap a loud groan. Harper scrambled down right after him, slamming the wooden door shut just as the front entrance violently splintered off its hinges upstairs. Wood dust drifted down from the ceiling planks. Jackson swallowed hard, tasting grit and blood, listening to the suffocating quiet. The distinct crunch of glass echoed above as rogue assassins invaded the small living room. "Don't make a sound," Harper whispered directly against his ear, her warm breath ghosting over his freezing skin. He didn't know what terrified him more, the armed killers pacing directly over their heads, or the sudden realization that his mate knew exactly how to disappear in the dark. The floorboards groaned above them as the search began. Hiding in the pitch-black cellar felt exactly like being buried alive. Dirt walls pressed inward, trapping the freezing air. But Jackson's skin burned with a sudden, vicious fever. The silver poison pumped through his system, rapidly shutting down his injured organs. A damp, cool cloth pressed firmly against his blistering forehead. Harper knelt closely beside his slumped frame. She didn't weep or surrender to the suffocating shadows. Under the weight of her steady gaze, he remembered a quiet night from his childhood. His father, the old Alpha, had returned from a brutal war, covered in deep gashes. His mother hadn't panicked, simply cleaning his wounds with quiet, unshakable strength. That exact same ancient Luna energy radiated off Harper right now. "Check the back rooms!" A deep voice barked through the floorboards. Jackson's pulse spiked. Processing the thick, rolling cadence of the man speaking, it wasn't the slick accent of a coastal mercenary. It was a harsh, clipped, northern drawl. They smelled of bitter cold and rotting pine. Her old pack. This wasn't a syndicate hit squad hunting a king. This was her abusive past, dragging her back to hell. A protective rumble rattled his ribs. He pushed his bruised shoulders off the dirt wall. "Stay down," Harper hissed, planting her small hands flat against his broad chest. "They are your old pack," he rasped, his voice trembling with raw fury. "I won't let them take you." Shoving him harder against the earth, her eyes locked onto his. "You can't fight them like this. You will die." Staring into the dark outline of her face, he fought the rising dizziness. "I am your Alpha. It is my job to die for you." Her sweet scent spiked with sudden, sharp anger. "I don't need a dead Alpha," she whispered fiercely. "I need you to stay quiet." In the stillness that followed the argument, she reached down and intertwined her slender fingers with his thick ones. His soul answered the touch immediately. The searing pain in his torso dulled to a low, throbbing ache as her physical contact actively pulled the fever right out of his blood. Boots suddenly paused directly above the hidden trapdoor. Dirt sprinkled down from the wooden planks, coating Jackson's eyelashes. Someone was standing right on top of their only exit. A sliver of pale moonlight pierced the dark cellar as the wooden trapdoor slowly creaked open. A single, thick combat boot stepped down onto the first stair, followed by the sweeping beam of a yellow flashlight. A rogue scout was descending into the dark. Harper let go of Jackson's hand. He reached back to grab her wrist, but his fingers only caught empty air. Slipping completely into the deep shadows beside the wooden staircase, she vanished. Years working as an emergency room nurse had taught her the fragile mechanics of the human body. She knew exactly which soft arteries carried the most blood, and exactly how fast a beating heart could stop. The rogue moved further down the stairs, sweeping the harsh light across the dirt floor. The beam hit Jackson's bloody, slumped body. "Found the target," the scout grunted, reaching for a silver blade strapped to his thigh. Jackson bared his teeth, ready to take the fatal stab just to buy Harper time to run. A small shadow lunged from the pitch-black corner. Harper didn't use a gun or a knife. She slammed a long, plastic medical syringe directly into the pulsing vein on the side of the scout's dirty neck, plunging the cylinder down with terrifying force. The scout dropped his flashlight. It hit the dirt with a dull thud, the beam rolling wildly across the walls. He gasped, his eyes rolling back into his head. The pure potassium chloride violently seized his cardiac muscles. He collapsed onto the earth like a sack of wet stones, dead before his knees even hit the ground. Dust plumed in the yellow flashlight beam. Jackson swallowed a dry breath, staring in absolute awe at the tiny, trembling woman standing over the corpse. Her chest heaved. She dropped the empty syringe, the plastic clattering against the rocks. Taking a life to save his sent the mate bond roaring with an all-consuming fire inside his chest. She wasn't a broken healer anymore. "Harper," he whispered, his voice thick with raw devotion. She turned slowly. The stormy gray in her eyes was gone, replaced by a bright, glowing, unnatural gold. Her inner wolf was waking up. "They won't get you," she promised, her voice dropping into a dark, primal growl as she stepped over the dead body, waiting for the next killer to come down the stairs. The yellow flashlight beam rolled to a stop against the cellar wall, illuminating the fresh corpse in harsh, slanted angles. Harper stood directly over the dead scout. Golden light bled from her irises, piercing the pitch-black shadows of the underground tomb. Her chest heaved. A jagged, violent rhythm ripped through the quiet as she stared down at the kill. She didn't freeze or panic. Crouching beside the body, her bare hands immediately patted down the rogue's blood-stained pockets. She searched the dead man with cold, clinical efficiency, hunting for intel. Jackson swallowed the sharp taste of copper. A raw, primal pride flared in his gut. Hot blood soaked the dirt floor beneath his boots, but he ignored the sting. He watched her pull a black tactical radio from the dead man's leather belt. Right above them, the floorboards groaned. A booming voice barked an order to check the outbuildings. The stomp of boots moved toward the front door, fading entirely as they stepped out into the howling blizzard. The wind whistled through the shattered glass upstairs. Dust motes settled slowly in the yellow flashlight beam. Harper dropped to her knees. The gold faded from her eyes, leaving them a stormy, exhausted gray. Adrenaline completely drained from her veins. Her small frame shook violently in the freezing dirt. Lifting his bruised arm, Jackson dragged his hand across the space between them. He rested his rough palm against her pale cheek. "You did what you had to do," he rumbled. She leaned into his touch. The scent of wild honey wrapped around him, thick and comforting against the stench of death. In her lap, the black radio sat perfectly still, a silent threat waiting to detonate. Scene 3.2, Point of View, Jackson. The freezing dampness of the cellar seeped straight into Jackson's bones. A violent shiver wrecked his frame, blurring the edges of his vision. Silver poison waged war against the antibiotics in his veins, and his wolf was losing the fight. The dirt walls faded. Suddenly, he tasted salty ocean air. Rain-slicked shipping docks replaced the cellar. The agonizing screams of his loyal beta echoed through the thick fog. Silver bullets tore through the night, cutting down his men. He had led his pack right into a slaughter. Guilt pressed a crushing weight against his sternum. "Jackson, stay with me." Gasping for air, he swiped his scarred arms blindly through the dark, fighting ghosts. His knuckles scraped the rocks before finding soft, warm skin. Harper knelt right beside him, gripping his face between her hands. "You are burning up," she whispered. His head fell forward, colliding gently with her shoulder. Her honey scent fought the phantom smell of ocean blood. He dragged a ragged breath into his lungs, letting her steady pulse anchor him to the present. "I failed them." The confession scraped his raw throat. A king never admitted defeat, but right now, he was just a bleeding man dying in the dirt. "No." She ran her fingers through his sweat-drenched hair. "You are here, You are fighting." Her voice acted as a tether, pulling him back from the docks. The phantom screams slowly died in his ringing ears. Then, a sharp burst of static hissed from the floorboards. Electric static cut straight through the quiet, vibrating from the black plastic casing in her lap. The radio crackled again, louder this time. "Report. Did you find the coastal bastard yet?" The deep, cruel voice echoed in the cramped space. Harper turned to solid ice. The sweet honey scent vanished instantly, replaced by the bitter, sour stink of absolute terror. Jackson felt the violent flinch rip through her muscles. Pushing back slightly, he examined her pale face. Her unblinking eyes locked onto the small speaker. "Harper," he rasped. The radio spoke again before she could open her mouth. "I know you are out there, Harper. I can smell your fear from the tree line. You really thought you could hide from me?" The silence stretched tight enough to snap. Dirt fell from the ceiling planks. This wasn't a hired gun. The man standing in the snow outside was the monster who had destroyed her, her ex-mate. Untamed fury ignited in Jackson's chest, burning hotter than the silver poison. He ignored his torn muscles. He ignored the blood pooling at his knees. Reaching out, he snatched the radio from her trembling hands. He pressed the talk button down with his bloody thumb. He didn't shout. He didn't roar. He let his voice drop into a lethal, quiet purr. "You are a dead man walking." He released the button, dropping the radio into the dust, waiting for the slaughter to begin. Jackson crushed the black plastic casing in his bloody fist until the cheap components violently snapped. Shards of jagged plastic cut his palm, dropping into the dark dirt below. His chest heaved, pulling ragged, uneven breaths into his burning lungs. He wanted to rip the ex-mate's throat completely out. A mocking laugh echoed through the floorboards above their heads. The monster wasn't leaving the cabin. Liquid splashed against the wooden planks, dripping steadily through the cracks and landing on Jackson's boots. The sharp, toxic stench of cheap gasoline pierced his nose. They couldn't win a fight in the dark, so the cowards had decided to turn the cellar into a fiery grave. Turning his head, he found Harper curled into a tight, frozen ball in the corner. Her stormy eyes were completely empty. She was gone. The scent of gas dragged him back to a horrible night in the coastal city. A rival gang had burned a crowded slum to ash before his enforcers could secure the block. Desperate screams from that night still echoed in his sleep. Guilt twisted his gut, forcing his ruined body off the dirt. His injured legs shook wildly under his weight. Silver poison actively melted his veins from the inside out. He reached down, hooking his bloody fingers around Harper's arms to pull her up. She flinched violently, shrinking away from his touch like he was made of hot fire. The abuser's voice had shattered her mind, leaving her trapped inside her own traumatic past. She tasted defeat, completely surrendering to the dark. Dust drifted down from the ceiling planks in the quiet. A bright orange glow suddenly flickered through the cracks in the wood, painting the dirt walls in the color of true hellfire. The orange glow rapidly expanded, hungrily licking the dry wooden beams of the cabin floor. Thick, black smoke poured directly down into the cramped cellar. Lacking any ventilation, the toxic ash quickly choked Jackson's lungs. He coughed a wet, agonizing hack that ripped his torn stitches right open. Fresh, hot blood leaked down his bruised ribs. Through the gray haze, his mate hadn't moved a single muscle. She sat silently in the dirt, completely ready to let the fire take her life. Years ago, Jackson had found a brutally beaten stray pup laid out in a freezing puddle, waiting peacefully for death. He had forced that stubborn beast to bite his hand, demanding it wake up and survive. He needed to do the exact same thing for his Luna right now. A burning beam crashed down from the ceiling, sending sparks showering across the rocks. Ash coated his tongue. He crawled through the dirt, dragging his bleeding knees right in front of her. "He wants you to burn," Jackson rasped, coughing black soot onto the ground. "He wants you to erase yourself from this world. Are you really going to let that coward win?" Grabbing her cold face in his large hands, he didn't use a soft, gentle touch. He used firm, absolute, demanding pressure. He forced her chin up, making her meet his glowing gaze. "Look at me. I am not him. I am your true mate, and we are not dying like rats in this hole." His golden eyes burned with unyielding devotion, acting as a torch against the icy trauma locked inside her chest. The fog in her stare parted. Survival instinct finally kicked back in. Shoving his hands away, she scrambled quickly to her feet, turning her back on the flames to dive toward the darkest corner of the room. Ignoring the burning stairs, Harper dropped to her knees beside her canvas medical bag. She yanked the black zipper open with frantic, desperate energy. Thick smoke aggressively blinded them both, hiding whatever she dug for in the dark compartment. Metal clanked against rock. She pulled out a green oxygen tank. Shoving the cold steel cylinder directly into his bleeding arms, she didn't ask for permission. "When I kick open that trapdoor," she yelled over the roaring flames, "you throw this directly into the hottest part of the fire. Then you run for the back exit." His ruined muscles deeply protested the effort required to lift the steel. He ignored the tearing pain, tightly gripping the cold tank against his bleeding chest. She wore the exact same terrifying, wicked smile his own mother used before striking down coastal enemies. He trusted her brilliant mind. He worshipped her wild courage. "Ready!" she screamed. The crackle of the raging fire swallowed her voice. Heat blistered his skin. He gave her a sharp, single nod. She violently kicked the burning wooden trapdoor wide open. A rush of fresh oxygen instantly fed the hungry flames, flaring the fire into a deadly, towering wall. Moving entirely on instinct, Jackson used every ounce of his remaining strength to hurl the steel tank straight up into the blazing inferno. "Move!" he roared, grabbing her waist and throwing them both toward the exterior storm doors just as a blinding, white-hot explosion ripped the cabin apart. The blast ripped through the cellar doors, launching Jackson and Harper into the freezing night. Scorching heat and splintered wood chased them through the air. They crashed into a snowbank outside the cabin. The oxygen tank acted as an incendiary, turning the tiny structure into a towering fireball. Jackson's back burned. Ash coated his tongue. Ringing pitched high in his ears, drowning out the crackle of the flames. He spit a mouthful of soot into the white powder, waiting for his vision to stop spinning. Pushing up on bleeding elbows, he scanned the snow for his mate. Harper was already moving. Instead of freezing in shock, she rolled onto her knees. Her fingers clamped firmly around a black rifle she had dragged from the cellar. Orange light from the inferno painted her pale face in stark lines. She had just detonated her only sanctuary to save him. Raw awe expanded in Jackson's chest. A burning beam collapsed into the fire pit. Sparks showered the snow. Did the northern assassins burn inside that trap? Did the blast finally kill her abusive ex-mate? Narrowing his golden eyes, Jackson searched the smoky wreckage. The winter blizzard whipped the dense smoke through the pine trees. A tall shadow broke through the gray haze, walking straight out of the flames. The crackling inferno masked the crunch of combat boots landing in the fresh snow, but the wind carried the scent of the approaching threat directly to Jackson's nose. It was the ex-mate. Gripping Harper's shoulder, Jackson yanked her backward toward the protective tree line. Torn stitches ripped further apart in his chest, protesting the violent movement. The monster stepped completely free of the choking smoke. He remained untouched by the deadly explosion, protected by a tactical vest lined with pure silver. Someone inside Jackson's coastal syndicate had secretly supplied a northern rogue with classified armor from the private armory. That betrayal cut deeper than any silver blade. 3 surviving assassins flanked their leader, holding silver knives that caught the firelight. The arrogant smirk on the ex-mate's face made Jackson crave a brutal kill. Jackson swallowed the rising metallic taste of his own failing blood. He couldn't fight 4 armed men in direct combat. He needed the terrain. "Run!" Jackson shoved Harper toward the unforgiving woods. She didn't argue. Spinning on her heel, she sprinted blindly into the treacherous snowdrifts. Acting as a bleeding shield, Jackson stood between his mate and the approaching killers. He let them see his glowing eyes. He let them smell his silver-laced blood. Pivoting on his good leg, Jackson limped wildly into the absolute darkness, intentionally leaving a red trail for the arrogant hunters to follow straight into the ice. Tearing through the dark pines, Jackson followed Harper's erratic path, away from the mountain trail and deep into a rocky ravine. His ruined lungs burned like fire by the time he finally caught up to her. She had actively hiked these harsh woods for 2 years, knowing exactly where the hidden drop-offs were located. They reached the edge of a frozen creek. Pale moonlight reflected off the black ice. Jackson dropped onto one bleeding knee. "Go across!" His voice scraped like sandpaper against the howling wind. She hesitated, turning her stormy eyes back to his failing body. "I am too big," he wheezed. "The ice will break under me." The aggressive shouts of the chasing assassins echoed clearly through the snowy trees behind them. The distance was closing fast. Harper's eyes darted from the black ice to his bleeding chest. She realized the lethal math of his plan. "No." Dropping her rifle into the snow, she lunged frantically toward him. Jackson threw up a bloody hand, stopping her dead in her tracks. Combat training on the rainy docks back home had taught him a ruthless lesson. Sometimes, destroying an enemy required dragging them into the freezing depths with you. A protective alpha refused to let his innocent mate pay for his blind mistakes. He slammed his combat boot down onto the creek edge. Spidery cracks webbed across the surface. The 3 leading assassins burst out of the tree line, charging blindly onto the fragile ice toward him. Jackson shot his Luna a devoted smile just as the frozen creek shattered, plunging him and the screaming killers into the black water below. Black water swallowed Jackson. The icy shock paralyzed his lungs, piercing his ruined chest with the sting of 1,000 silver needles. Poison locked his joints, dragging him into the dark depths. Thrashing blindly, 3 armed assassins clawed at his torn clothes. They kicked his bleeding ribs. He swallowed bitter water, fighting the crushing current. A drowning killer grabbed his throat. Operating purely on survival instinct, Jackson drove his combat boot into the man's face, feeling the satisfying crunch of facial bone. Snatching another panicked rogue by the tactical vest, he shoved the thrashing body deep under a sheet of unbroken ice. The watery screams faded into dark silence. Lungs burning, Jackson kicked toward the pale moonlight shimmering on the surface. He punched his bloody fist right through the jagged ice above. A ragged gasp tore from his throat. Scraping his bare stomach against the sharp rocks, he dragged his frozen frame onto the snowy riverbank. River water, mixed with crimson blood, spilled from his lips onto the smooth stones. Hypothermia shut down his major organs. Paralyzed on the ice, he waited for the ringing in his ears to stop. A piercing scream shattered the quiet pines. Harper. The sound of her terror ripped his soul in half. He pushed against the frozen earth, but his bruised arms collapsed. Out of the dark tree line, a tall shadow dragged a struggling figure into the pale moonlight. The cruel ex-mate had Harper trapped, pulling her by her hair straight across the bloody snow, far out of Jackson's reach. Blowing snow whipped across the riverbank, coating Jackson's paralyzed limbs in white powder. Pinned to the sharp rocks by his own failing muscles, he bled onto the ice, forced to watch his worst nightmare unfold. The ex-mate threw Harper directly into a deep snowdrift. Having lost her hunting rifle in the dark woods, she scrambled backward unarmed. The silver-plated monster towered over her, wanting to break her spirit before he stopped her beating heart. "Look at you," the ex-mate laughed. The harsh sound scraped against Jackson's eardrums. "You are still just a pathetic stray. You really thought a coastal alpha would actually want broken trash like you?" Ice cracked under the monster's boots. A different kind of fracture echoed in the quiet air. Harper's fragile spirit completely shattered. The sweet scent of wild honey vanished, replaced by the sour stink of absolute surrender. Jackson dug his broken fingernails into the freezing dirt. He tasted his own bitter failure. He recognized the hollow look taking over Harper's pale face, the same blank stare his murdered brothers wore before they died on the shipping docks. She stopped fighting. Her trembling hands fell limp in the white snow. Turning her tear-streaked face toward the riverbank, she looked directly at him. She was silently saying goodbye. Her gray eyes conveyed profound apologies, fully believing the toxic lies of the man standing above her. The agonizing silence stretched tight. The ex-mate drew a silver blade from his tactical vest. "I am going to make you watch him bleed to death," the monster sneered, pointing the polished steel at Jackson's frozen body. "Then I am going to erase you." Jackson's pulse raced against the rocks. He absolutely had to move. A king does not let his Luna die in the snow. Dragging his freezing torso across the jagged ice, Jackson left a crimson trail of alpha blood behind him. Every single agonizing pull ripped his torn chest further open. He didn't roar. He didn't issue a booming command. Focusing his burning soul directly on the tiny female lying in the snow, he offered his life. Pushing every ounce of his remaining mate bond through the cold air, he surrendered his pride to anchor her. "Harper," he rasped. The breathless whisper hung in the freezing wind. It wasn't a demand for submission. It was a desperate plea from a devoted partner. True alpha strength wasn't about violent dominance. It was about laying down your life to protect your equal. He remembered his mother's gentle voice breaking through his father's darkest rages, proving that absolute vulnerability was the most dangerous weapon in the world. Under the weight of his steady stare, Harper blinked. The mating mark burned within his chest as he watched the miracle happen. The ex-mate raised the silver blade high into the air, preparing to strike a lethal blow. Harper didn't flinch. She didn't cower. The frozen ice encasing her broken heart shattered into a million pieces. Fire bloomed beneath Jackson's skin as the honey scent violently returned, mixed this time with the metallic tang of a lethal predator. Rejecting the toxic lies, she fully realized her worth. The ex-mate swung the jagged steel down toward her fragile neck. Harper's eyes bled into a blinding gold. A booming rumble rose in Jackson's throat. His Luna was awake, and she was about to end the slaughter. The silver blade slashed through the freezing air, aimed straight for her neck. Pinned to the jagged rocks by his failing muscles, Jackson waited for the sickening sound of his mate dying. Instead, Harper shot her bare hand upward. She caught the serrated edge right in her palm. Tearing flesh crunched wetly in the quiet. Crimson blood spilled down her wrist, staining the white snow. She didn't flinch. Embracing the wild predator inside her, she locked her boots against the ice and held her ground. The ex-mate gasped. He yanked the weapon backward, but the steel refused to budge. Harper gripped the blade with terrifying strength. A wicked, bloody smile spread across her pale face. Jackson recognized that look. He had fought a desperate rogue years ago in the coastal slums who smiled the exact same way right before dragging an enemy into the dirt. Seeing it on his Luna forced Jackson's dying heart into a frantic rhythm. Toxic metal fueled her rage. Twisting her bleeding hand, she shifted her weight forward. Bones snapped with a loud crack, echoing through the clearing like a dry branch breaking in half. The ex-mate screamed, dropping to his knees. The harsh sound bounced off the pine trees, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Jackson tasted copper on his tongue, waiting for the ringing in his ears to fade. Pulling the silver knife smoothly from the monster's broken grip, she stood over him. The snow beneath them turned red, and Jackson knew the real slaughter had just begun. Dark snow fell across the clearing, coating Jackson's paralyzed limbs. Icy poison shut down his nervous system, leaving him bleeding out on the sharp river stones. Shadows crept into the edges of his vision. He couldn't physically stand beside his mate, but a king refused to die uselessly. Two surviving assassins crept out of the dark tree line. They flanked Harper from the shadows, stepping quietly over the bloody ice. Needing to draw their attention, Jackson dug deep into his ruined soul. He dragged cold air into his burning lungs. Summoning his fading power, he unleashed the beast. Vibrations from a low rumble shook the rocks beneath his frozen stomach. It built rapidly, exploding into a deafening alpha howl. The booming sound ripped through the quiet valley. It wasn't a call for help. It was a brutal, dominant challenge from a coastal ruler, demanding absolute terror. The echo faded into the howling wind. The two creeping assassins stopped dead. They whipped their heads around, staring at the bleeding man on the ice. Invisible pressure forced the lesser wolves to cower, taking several scared steps backward into the brush. His scarred father had used that exact same commanding trick on the burning city docks, dropping rival gangs to their knees. Jackson used it now to stun the cowards. Hypothermia threatened to claim his beating heart before sunrise. He didn't care. Pushing his remaining primal strength directly through their bond, he surrendered his tight control. Letting his head fall back onto the cold ice, he watched the distracted assassins ignore the true threat standing right behind them. Scraping his cheek against the frozen riverbank, Jackson kept his glowing eyes locked on the clearing. The ex-mate scrambled to his feet, cradling his ruined wrist against his chest. Blind with pure anger, the tall monster lunged forward with a furious roar. Harper didn't meet his brute force head-on. She sidestepped smoothly, dodging the clumsy attack. Years spent studying fragile human anatomy in bright emergency rooms taught her exactly where every major artery and weak tendon lived. She knew how to dismantle a body. Slashing low, she cut his thigh. Spinning, she sliced his shoulder. The monster howled, stumbling into the powdery snow as her stolen blade severed his kneecap. Jackson watched her move with lethal grace. Her intense passion flooded his cold veins through the mating bond. The bleeding ex-mate grew desperate. His wild attacks became sloppy and predictable. Roaring, the fool swung his uninjured arm in a wide, uncontrolled arc toward her head. He wanted a brutal punch, but he left his chest totally exposed. He forgot to protect his own heart. Harper recognized the fatal mistake instantly. She planted her bloody boots into the red snow, dropping her shoulder low. Gripping the silver handle with both hands, she locked her golden eyes on the target. The freezing wind died. Jackson stopped breathing, watching his fierce Luna brace herself to end the nightmare forever. Harper stepped into the strike, driving the silver blade straight through the center of her abuser's chest. The monster didn't scream. A wet rattle scraped his throat before his knees hit the red snow. Blood pulsed from the severed artery, painting the ice. He pitched forward, landing face down in the dirt. The wind died. Blood dripped from the serrated steel in her grip, hitting the rocks with soft, rhythmic taps. The remaining assassins didn't wait. Dropping their cheap knives, they took one look at the glowing gold bleeding from the Luna's eyes and scrambled blindly into the dark pines. Jackson watched them run, his cheek pressed flat against the jagged river stones. Freezing water lapped at his boots. His vision narrowed to a dark tunnel, trapping him in the cold. The wealthy trader back in the coastal city was going to win by default. He tried to lift his arm, desperate to reach her, but his muscles refused the command. Metal clattered against the rocks. Harper threw the bloody knife away. She dropped hard onto her knees beside his frozen ribs. Warm, slick hands clamped onto his freezing cheeks, smearing red across his jaw. "Jackson, stay with me." Wild honey and raw desperation wrapped around his fading pulse. Blinking against the falling snow, he let his eyelids slide shut, trusting the dark to take him. The black water of unconsciousness swallowed him whole, dragging him far below the freezing wind. He stopped shivering. The agonizing burn in his torn chest faded into a dangerous, comfortable numbness. Sharp pressure cracked against his sternum. Harper drove the heels of her hands into his ruined chest, pumping a frantic, clinical rhythm. Hot tears splashed against his frozen lips. "You don't get to die on me," she screamed, the raw sound tearing her throat. The salt of her tears burned his mouth. A stubborn spark of fire flickered deep inside his dying veins, fighting the silver poison just to answer her call. A rhythmic thumping vibrated through the solid ice beneath his spine. It wasn't a wolf. Military-grade helicopter blades chopped the night air, whipping the snow into a blinding frenzy. Twin searchlights sliced through the dark, pinning them in a circle of stark white light. His syndicate rescue team had finally tracked the Alpha beacon. Armed enforcers dropped from ropes, boots hitting the riverbank in a synchronized crunch. They rushed forward with medical bags. Harper didn't step back. Baring her blood-stained teeth, she shielded his body, projecting unbroken defiance against the encroaching pack. Jackson forced his eyes open, Lifting a numb, shaking hand, he hooked his fingers into the collar of his lead enforcer's tactical vest. "Treat her," he wheezed, tasting ash and copper. "Like your queen." The loyal men immediately dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to the bloody woman standing guard. Satisfied, Jackson let the peaceful dark drag him completely under. Sunlight baked the glass walls of the coastal penthouse, warming the salt-laced ocean air. Weeks of brutal recovery had knitted Jackson's chest back together, leaving thick, jagged scars hidden beneath the crisp lines of a custom black suit. He pushed the sliding glass door open, stepping out onto the wide balcony. Harper stood by the metal railing. Wind whipped the hem of her white dress around her calves. Her hand rested on the steel barrier, putting the faded, brutal scar across her palm on full display. He worshipped that mark. The hidden traitor's blood had already washed off the city docks, courtesy of the tactical intel she ripped from the assassins in the mountains. His syndicate was secure. Hearing his leather shoes scuff the concrete, she turned. A warm, brilliant smile split her face, melting the final traces of frost from his bones. She closed the distance between them, stepping directly into his space and burying her face against his neck. "Are you ready for this?" he purred. The low vibration rumbled against her collarbone. Tilting her head back, she exposed the pale, delicate skin of her throat to the bright morning sun. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. Jackson let his fangs drop. He leaned down, capturing her scent, and sank his teeth into her flesh right above the bustling city streets. Hot blood spilled across his tongue. The ancient mating bond snapped into place like a steel vault, locking shut, permanently branding their souls together in the heat of the sun.